Welcome to the Mobile Games Playbook in association with Liftoff. Join us as we uncover the latest trends in user acquisition, monetization, and mobile game design.
Hello, and welcome to the Mobile Games Playbook. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. This is a podcast all about what makes a great mobile game, what is and isn't working for mobile game designers, and all of the latest trends. I'm your host, John Jordan, and joining me today, we have two special guests. We have Paula Neves, who's a senior product manager at Zynga. How's it going, Paula?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And also we have Karen Chen, who is an account executive at Liftoff. How's it going, Karen?
Doing well. Thanks, John.
Good. So in today's episode, maybe a little bit different to some of the ones we've done recently. We're going to talk sort of generally about women in games, obviously sort of a massive subject, and we can only sort of cover bits of it, maybe anecdotal bits of it. But I think maybe good to start off with you, Paula. And I think it's interesting. One of the sort of issues we have, I think, in the games industry is how women get into sort of the development industry side of it. So it might be a good starting point if you can talk us through sort of how you got into games.
Yeah, of course. So I've always really loved gaming, like since I can even remember. I was playing like Enduro and Keystone Capers, like giving away my age, but on the Atari. So it's always something like it has always been something in the back of my mind. But I'm originally from Brazil, and the industry there is not very big or very strong. I mean, it is strong in terms of like we have really talented people, but it's not very big. There's not a lot of investment. So it was something that slowly I just pushed away from my mind, and But my first experience was in this really small studio from Rio called Nano Games. And the way I sort of got into it, it's because I had a friend that worked there, and we were like 10 people, and they needed someone to help with everything, like product and marketing wise, those startup sort of deal. And I just went for it, because I was like, okay, this is my chance to start here.
You thought it was sort of a bit weird for games to be a job, or was that something that you just thought, well, of course, games are a big industry, people get jobs in them all the time, why shouldn't I get a job in there?
No, I didn't think it was weird at all. I just think it was incredibly unlikely that anyone would land a gaming job in Brazil. And then when I landed one, I just felt lucky. And then from then on, I think I worked in, at the time, most of the big companies in Rio that were doing games, like 3, and then so I got pretty lucky, I think. And of course that I've been in Montreal for 4 years now. I've gone to a lot of events, and I know like how big the industry is. But that first thing with my friend, that was I guess that was the start.
Quite different from moving to Rio to Montreal, but that's probably another story.
Another podcast webinar thing.
Absolutely. Cool. And Karen, how was it for you?
Honestly, on my side, advertising had never really seemed like an option before. When you kind of grow up, you're exposed to ads, and the mobile landscape seemed a bit daunting. And so, again, just kind of came into the industry not knowing much, college marketing classes kind of telling me like, hey, this is what mobile looks like, right? So the basic acronyms that I'm familiar with. But once I entered the industry, realized how big it was. Gaming's obviously a huge portion of that. And so gained a lot of experience working with gaming advertisers across the board, from, casual to like mid-core type gaming apps. And so, yeah, I would say most of my experience has been exposure on the job, really.
Either of you to answer this one. Have you found? I mean, have you? I think maybe easy for me to say, not being a woman, but my impression of having been in the industry for a while is as the industry's got bigger and sort of we have more sort of jobs in the industry that aren't specifically about sort of coding and sort of making the game. That in some ways has made it, I think, easier for women to get into the games sort of sector as a whole, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's sort of easier. So, I mean, how have you found it over? Maybe Paula, let's start with you. You've been in the industry longer. Have you found that there has been a sort of appreciation in the companies you've worked at that it's good to encourage more women to be in the industry, or I guess I would probably say, tell me if I'm wrong, things are probably moving in the right direction. Maybe they're not moving fast enough. What's your sort of view on the trajectory in that respect?
It was a good summary. Like, we definitely, there's improvement, but we're not there yet. So you do see, like, if you look at from a general prism of like gender within one company, you will tend to see more and more women representing in gaming companies in general. When you look at leadership, though, it's still very, very different. So it's still very, I mean, minimally represented. And the problem is, people talk a lot about companies and like companies investing in this or finding it interesting. And you see that, especially like the bigger companies, they put a lot of effort into this, most of them. But the problem lies, at least from my point of view, like a lot before that, right? And when I was at Gazeus Games, I was a director there. So I had a lot of access to, I was the only female director out of 8. uh, and we had a lot of push for LGBT jobs, for women, for diversity in general, but we wouldn't get the CVs. We wouldn't get like women, and that's because there are several reasons behind it. But one, they don't find themselves represented, so they don't think they can work in the gaming industry. And also, just because if you go, at least, I don't know if it's changing now, but at least in my time, if you went into uni for anything that was like computer science, you would be the only girl. And then it's not something everyone survives, right? And then just it's, I know I'm giving a long answer, but the final thing I wanted to say is that there was this study made that showed that before the 80s, a lot of women went into like computer science roles. We have so many good examples of women programmers way back. Even like Ada Lovelace, like the first, first programmer ever was a woman. Carol Shaw, so many examples. But then, as in the 80s, the personal computer started being a thing. It started being marketed as something for guys, and you see that the curve just goes down of like women making it into those sort of courses. And then less and less women make it into the uni for those courses, less and less make it out because it's tough, you're the only girl in the class. And then all the way, the funnel starts really early. That's what I really wanted to say. But in terms of companies putting in an effort, I see that it's getting better.
Do you think does it matter that there aren't more women programmers specifically? I mean, do you think there are, sort of specific roles that women should be in, or do you think it's a sort of a general? Say we got to 50-50 in the games industry, women and men roles. Would it matter where they were, or do you think women programmers, say specifically, that would change sort of obviously? Would it change the way that the sort of companies worked? Would it change the way games were made? Do you think?
Yeah, I think we need representation across the board in every single position, because if you look, it's very skewed, right? You have a lot of women artists, you have a lot of women in marketing, but not devs, right? And it's important because I've been in discussions with devs where they were coding a character and they were talking about like stance and things like that. And like, it's always good to have representation. And I don't mean only gender, but like diversity in general, right? Across all roles, for sure.
Karen, how do you see that? How I mean, I guess your sort of Liftoff is probably different because you're sort of an ad company, so you still have coders in there, I suppose. Don't you? I mean, still, how do you find the sort of the gender split between roles in the company?
I was just about to kind of comment on the point that you were talking about, Paula, around, I think it's important to have like more equitable gender across all different roles, not just like in the marketing and creative space, which I feel like generally we will see more like female positions being in those, being in those positions, right? Like personally, when I'm working with other UA managers across the board, I would say the split is pretty even. Like I'm seeing a good number of like women and male like counterparts in that area, but to the point of like game design, right? From the conception of the game all the way to the characters, I think it's important for us to have diversity and inclusion to ensure that we're capturing a greater scope. I think when I think about myself playing certain games, some are more enticing than others, potentially for these instances, right? Like these games could potentially appeal to someone not like me. And it would be nice to see us moving into that more inclusive culture.
I think we didn't touch on pay equity, but I also think that that is improving, especially in the gaming and tech industries, and there's so much room in other industries. Like, let's say the Women's World Cup is happening, right? I love football. I'm trying to watch it because it's in Australia, so it's tough. But, there's this football player, Abby Wambach. She was one of the biggest icons of the U.S. team in the 2000s, and she won an award when she was retiring that was huge, right? And in the same day, on the same stage, was Kobe Bryant and Peyton Manning. They all got the same award, right? And while those two guys were thinking about their retirements and what they would do with the millions and millions to invest, Abby was thinking how she would pay mortgage that month, right? And that's a story that I've heard from an interview that she made, right? So it's just bizarre. Like, she's as big as they are. She got the same award, but that's the difference.
It sort of pulls apart two areas. So there's sort of the pay side of it, as you point out, which is again not a solved problem, but that's sort of a well understood problem. And I think there will be very few companies in general, but even in the games industry, that would have pay disparity, for the same role. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that would be seen. I think that would be sort of baked in now that games companies, wouldn't be doing that. Whereas I guess the other, more, as you point out, the more sort of pernicious thing is there's more for like, in that case, for sports players who, some of whom have had 20, 30 years at the sort of height of their career, and that's where the money's been, whereas other people have had 20, 30 years as height of that career, but obviously there's not been pay equality across for that period of time. So you sort of have this lagging indicator, I suppose, in terms of that particular sort of example, which is quite hard to deal with, because it's not a company saying we've got this producer and this producer, one's a man, one's a woman, and we're going to pay them the same. But I think those sort of things are much harder to deal with, because I guess what I'm trying to say is they're not sort of they're more cultural rather than sort of individual company culture, and that obviously culture as a whole is a complicated thing. I was going to say talk a little bit about and particularly sort of mobile games. So I think generally, unless you have a very specific sort of, there's some games of sort of skew very male, and some games sort of skew female. But mobile is sort of interesting as I think it's a sort of a sector that generally is probably more female skewed, if anything. And I guess that would be one area where, Karen, is you're more in that space. Do you think that, given the amount of women playing and spending money in games, has it been surprising that there aren't sort of women sort of on the game design side in particular haven't come through more? Obviously, there are companies that do focus on female gaming and do have female designers, but it's sort of a bit surprising that it hasn't sort of over-indexed the other way, given how women are such an important audience for mobile games.
I definitely think so. Given a lot of like the statistics that I was looking into, about almost half, if not half, of women are on these mobile games. I do still feel like there's a bit of a like a genre that skews more female, whereas I think about like a match 3 or some type of like simulation type game, a game that appeals to like adventure, seems to be more like female driven. And so I do think it is a bit surprising that the industry as a whole, from the game developers all the way kind of trickling down, haven't been more.
There have been studios that have tried to focus on women games, but actually it seems to be sometimes quite difficult to make a sort of genre, to make specifically a genre specific game. I've just noticed sometimes people often sort of rate, or not often, but some companies raise money to say we're going to make games to particularly focus on the female audience, and that seems to be quite a difficult thing to do. Is that is that because we maybe focusing on gender is actually not a great way to make a good game? Paula, you got any thoughts on that? I mean, is maybe are we good games are just good games, and we shouldn't maybe worry too much about who we're targeting in terms of sort of genders or demographics or something?
When it comes to UA, you have to like know who your audience is, and when you're making games as well, you have to see if the product you're building has product market fit. So those things are important; they can't be ignored. But I hate, honestly, personally, the whole concept of games for women and games for men. I just hate that. Like I played shooters my whole life, and all of these things go back to the football example. And you said it's cultural. It's cultural. Like the problem lies therein where people perceive that certain things are for boys and certain things are for girls when they're not, right? Um, and that's where the problem lies, really, and it's really tough to change. But I grew up hearing like all the time, especially growing up in Brazil, and where it's pretty chauvinistic, and growing up and just hearing all the time that the stuff I liked I wasn't supposed to like. And when I was thinking of having a family, and I was terrified of having a girl in Brazil. I was terrified. I didn't want it to be a girl. I wanted it to be a boy. And then I moved I always thought I wanted a boy. And then I moved to Canada because I didn't want a girl to go through the stuff I went through. And now that I'm in Canada, I got pregnant. I had my kid. She's 2.5 years old. It's a girl, and it's the best thing, that it's a girl. And she's in Canada, and she gets to get representation all the time. A little example on that cultural thing, I was taking her to daycare, and she was on the carrier, and there was a renovation going on in the house, like outside. It was 5 women with hard hats, the boots, everything, just women doing the renovation. And when we passed by, she's super smiley. She smiled and waved, and they all smiled and waved. So just right there, of course, she's 2.5, but she saw a bunch of women doing construction work, and that makes a difference. Like construction work is not for men. So I don't think I answered your question, but I hope that questions like that aren't asked. And it's not against you, of course, but I hope that we live in a world one day that is not a thing. You know what I mean?
That is again, it goes back to the sort of the cultural thing, isn't it? It's sort of, it's not these things. You need laws for certain things, but the harder things to change are those just assumptions, I guess. People have about stuff. I mean, do you think one of your early questions, you're talking about sort of leadership roles, which again, that's probably sort of cultural to a degree, but sort of harder to sort of. It's not something you can just say equal pay or something. Leadership roles is partly due to the individual, and obviously, there may be ways in which you can make it easier for certain types of people. I mean, do you think that's sort of the main area we need to sort of consider going in terms of the games companies, as a whole? Is that sort of a key thing, given that there's quite a lot of women joining the industry in various roles? Is it more about those sort of leadership things now?
I think we've seen like great improvement in the looking at it from a general perspective. Of course, we need to continue improving, but I think it would be interesting if companies would start focusing more on the leadership aspect. I've seen that some are, like the bigger ones are. It makes a lot of difference, right? In a big company like Zynga, or for instance, in our game, the VP of product is a woman, and it makes a difference because leadership has voice, like has more voice, right? So it's important to have people that have voice that are women, so for me, it would be a really big deal if we got to a point where it was almost half in terms of leadership. But women like tend to think about the whole and not want to hurt people, so they tend to not step on other people, so they don't get promotions as much. They don't negotiate because sometimes they think it's not fair. So I mean, it's it's a cultural thing again, in a way, but I think companies can and should encourage that.
It's also important to show those who are like younger and just starting out that there are people who look like me, are like me in roles of like senior leadership. And I I think that's very important to kind of mold the next generation, so to speak, to ensure that, we do have a voice.
It's not necessarily down always to sort of having rules around these things, but sometimes it's about more subtle things, particularly about, you can think of something like, crunch in the games industry, where, clearly crunch is going to be bad for anyone who's a sort of carer or has sort of family commitments, which is generally kind of women. So it's not necessarily that women are sort of directly targeted; they're sort of indirectly targeted, but they find it harder to do management roles because they just can't throw 80 hours a week at games in a way that sort of men maybe can, because their partner or their wife is sorting out the kids. I mean, again, is that something that's just going to sort of slowly change? And obviously, crunch seems to be something that the industry is sort of dealing with on a more sort of structural basis. So that's sort of a hopeful sign, I suppose.
I think that the problem there lies in the women sorting out the kids, like you said, right? It has to be both. But again, cultural thing. I think that particular part is changing, at least in my generation and my small circle of friends. Like the guys are dividing the work. My partner, that's exactly how it happens, and nobody says. I don't say, "Oh, he's helping me." No, like he's. I don't even use the verb, help, because it's not about help. It's about dividing. So if he was working in a gaming company too at one point, and if he was to crunch too, that would have been insane for him managing our daughter. So crunch is bad and it can't be there. But I think the problem is it does affect more the women, because not all families are like mine, and like most of my friends, and it should be.
In terms of sort of, I mean, maybe sort of early stages, Karen, but in terms of your career, how do you see, do you see the games industry as a place that is now somewhere where a woman can have a career for 30, 40 years, and it's just like any other industry? It doesn't matter that it's sort of tech and games, which it still probably doesn't have a great reputation maybe outside the industry.
I definitely think so, but I will say this is not an industry where you're exposed to early on, when you're growing up. At least for me, it was not something that seemed like a possibility. I think, Paula, you and I had like a very different, I almost went through the normal like gender norms way, where my family would take us to like get-togethers and it was just the boys playing Smash in the game room. And it's like, if I play, right, the first few times that I'm playing this game, I won't be good. I'm like learning the controls. Like I will not win against you most of the time. And having those experiences affects the way that I think gaming growing up in general. There are certain games that I feel I can play, right? I love Candy Crush. Everyone in my life knows that I love Candy Crush. I'm on like level 6,000. That's how much I love it. But I think if I had kind of gone beyond that norm when I was growing up, things might be different. I might be interested in all the other games that are out there. It just seemed less accessible for me, or, the group of people, like, I don't want to play with you. You're not going to win. So I'm just going to play with someone who's good at it.
Yeah, the social aspect of it is really complicated, right? I think maybe for me, it was different. I didn't have a lot of friends, so I would play just me. So I got good at playing. And then when I would play like at a LAN house or something, I was already good at it because I was playing most of the time by myself, and whenever, like, I've played games for 40 years almost now. So um, I haven't played one single MMO, because when I tried playing MMOs way back when, it was just horrible when they found out you were a girl online, and it was just horrible. So um, although the industry is going in a very good way, the gaming industry, I feel that the gaming public is going the opposite way. It's every time it's more toxic, and it gets worse and worse and worse from that perspective.
Yeah, I think I've recently, even on like YouTube Shorts and TikTok, you hear about some of the horror stories of like female streamers out there. And so I agree with that sentiment, Paula.
And I guess so. Yeah, that sort of cultural toxicity is something that sort of is a sort of spreads across the industry. It's not necessarily just a male female thing. I think that's again going back to culture, a wider cultural sort of inability to be nice to people. Or anyway, it's not include that one. But again, something when you're talking there, Karen, it was something it was interesting. I think that you were talking about, and again, I hesitate a little bit to broach the question, but I think as we, particularly with mobile games, as I think mobile games have supported sort of some new genres, and I think Paula, correct me if you feel you need to. I think generally, although I know some very competitive women generally do not like. Most women don't like competitive games, and I think having sort of more cooperative type games or more Candy Crush sort of games, which do clearly have strong social aspects in them, but are not sort of not I've just shot you and I'm gonna like trash talk you on a consoles type games. I think that's probably been quite encouraging generally to how games are viewed in culture, and I think probably within the industry as well. That it's as you were sort of joking there that you're such a hardcore Candy Crush fan that you have an insane amount of levels. So it's never been the case that people who play casual games can't be super hardcore about playing casual games, and I think that sort of has allowed that sort of a new community of sort of hardcore gamers to be there in their genre, and I think that's been quite welcoming in some ways to women who don't want to play Call of Duty online.
That's a very interesting point, like a hardcore casual gamer, if you will. I'm not a big whale user. I have not spent much money, but anytime I get a little promotion of like 99 cents for an hour of unlimited life, I will sit on the couch and play for an hour. And my partner jokes around sometimes because he games mostly on his PC, but he's like, you're a gamer too, right? You like sit down for an hour and you play Candy Crush and you're just there. He's like, that's what I do on my computer, just with my friends or whatever it is that he's doing. So I think that's a really interesting point.
In fact, there was sort of a wider point around that where people, I can't remember which game it was, or a few years ago, they were doing surveys with people who were playing games, and there was this sort of statement they say to people, "Are you a gamer?" And lots of women and sort of middle-aged women will go, "No, of course I'm not a gamer. I don't have a console." And then they go, "How many hours do you play on your phone?" Or 3 hours a day or something. They're like, "What?" I mean, that's a serious. The fact, we would if you were playing World of Warcraft, that we'd it's I think hopefully over time that sort of the fact that people don't call themselves gamers, I think is probably a good thing because now we know, obviously, whatever 3 billion of 8 billion people in the world are gamers, and if the other 5 billion people had mobile phones, they'd all be gamers too. We're all gamers almost. So maybe that's a bit more of a positive view for the future. I mean, as we're sort of finishing up now, how is there any sort of closing remarks you have, or anything you kind of think should be important for the industry to be thinking about to sort of hopefully accelerate the changes that we're seeing?
I think that, like Karen said in one of her answers, representation is really important. More women need to see women there to be able to think, okay, I can do that too. So, if as a company you have speaking opportunities and you can send women, that's really cool. Again, as a company, if you don't have a lot of women in leadership roles, try to put them there, and then try to understand that from that perspective, from the perspective of how women grew up in culture and society. They tend to see everyone and want to take care of everyone. So like maybe they won't push hard for it, but you have to go and maybe do more of the pushing yourself to see if she's interested. So I think that's why we don't see that much out there. I think that it needs a female eye to begin with, right? To be able to get those promotions and to get those things, right? You need to say, I've been in that position to say, to be in an interview and I wasn't the person that was hiring, like I didn't have the veto power or anything. But I was talking to the person who was like, listen, we're interviewing a girl, go this way, like ask questions this way, because she will give you more information and she will start self-affirming more, so yeah, so you need a female eye, and companies should be doing sort of that, trying to figure out, okay, if she's the best candidate for the promotion, she's not pushing for it, let me push for it on her behalf. And representation over and over and over again.
+1 to everything that you just said, Paula. I think taking things maybe more specific to like the gaming community in general, it would be great to just, I guess, like foster an open community for kids in general growing up, and understanding that there is a community for everyone. I think it's sometimes tough understanding, again, in my perspective, gaming seemed so like male focused as I was growing up. So how can we combat some of these more innate, like what we call gender norms, that like how do we break across that, so that there are opportunities for all of us, and hopefully we're able to see that through the years as well.
Well, thank you very much, Karen and Paula.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your expertise in discussing the subject. Hope you found that useful. And thanks to you for watching, listening, however you are consuming the podcast. Every episode we are talking to people in the mobile games sector, so different aspects. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode, slightly different to some of our other ones. But please come back next time to see what's going on in the world of mobile games. See you then. Goodbye.